Hello. In this video, we're going to talk about how to solve a system of quadratic equations. You will always start with two equations in your problem. So in this case, we have y equals negative x squared minus x plus 6 and y equals x plus 3. Now, some of them might start off as two quadratics, meaning that both equations will have x squareds. Although it might look a little bit trickier, you will follow the same process that we'll talk about in this video. So the very first step to these problems is to take your two equations and set them equal to each other. So I will have negative x squared minus x plus 6 equals x plus 3. Now from here, I want to move everything over to one side of the equal sign so that I can solve. It does not matter if you move everything over to the left or to the right. You can choose whichever one you think is easier. In this case, I'm going to move the x plus 3 over to the other side. So to move a positive x over, I'll have to subtract the x on both sides. To move a positive 3 over, I'll have to subtract the 3 on each side. Now on this right-hand side, my x's and the 3 minus 3 cancels out. On the left-hand side, I'll have negative x squared. Negative x minus x gives me negative 2x, and 6 minus 3 is a positive 3. I just have a 0 on this side of my equation. From here, I'm left with a quadratic that's equal to 0. So in order to solve this, I am going to factor. Every one that we give you in this class will factor, and that's usually the easiest way to solve your quadratics. So what I will do is take the very first number, which in this case is a negative 1, and I'll multiply it with the last number, which is a 3. Negative 1 times 3 gives me negative 3. From here, I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 3, but I need them to add to the negative 2. What two numbers multiply to negative 3 and add to negative 2? Well, that will have to be negative 3 and 1. Now, when I'm factoring here, I have to remember to divide by the number that's out front. So I'll divide both of these by that negative 1. That negative 3 divided by negative 1 becomes a positive 3, and 1 divided by negative 1 becomes a negative 1. So my two factors are x plus 3 and x minus 1. Again, if you prefer to factor by grouping, you can absolutely do so, but I like to use this shortcut because I think it's a little bit easier. Once we have everything factored, we are going to solve for x. So I set both of my parentheses equal to 0. So we have x plus 3 equals 0 and x minus 1 equals 0. Solving those gives me x equals negative 3 and x equals 1. Now, a lot of us are going to be tempted to stop here, but anytime that I'm solving a system of equations, I not only need to find my x values, but I also need to find my y values. In order to find our y values, what we're going to do is take our x's and plug them into our original equations. Now, I don't have the original equations on my screen right now. You should have them right in front of you, but I'm going to write them just kind of off to the side here again so I know what they are. They gave me y equals negative x squared minus x plus 6 and y equals x plus 3. Now, when you're solving for your y values, you get to pick which of these two equations that you would like to use. I recommend picking whichever one you think is easiest. I think that this x plus 3 is going to be easiest to work with, so that's the one that I'm going to use here. So what I'm going to do to figure out my y's are take my two x values and plug them in. So for this 3, or negative 3, I should have y equals, instead of the x, I'm plugging in negative 3, and I keep the plus 3. When I go to work with this one here, I have y equals, in for the x is going the 1, and I keep the plus 3. That gives me, well, if I'm solving this one, negative 3 plus 3 is 0, and over here, 1 plus 3 is 4. At this point, I now have 2 x's and 2 y's. For my final answer, I want to combine these x's and y's together and write them as an ordered pair. So my first ordered pair will be negative 3, comma, 0, and my second ordered pair will be 1, comma, 4. One of the most common mistakes that students make while doing these problems is forgetting to find your x and y. So always remember that if I give you 2 equations and you're solving a system, you have to solve for both x's and for y's. If you are feeling confident with that example that I just walked you through, you can go ahead and stop this video and start working through the practice problems on page 47 and 48. Please skip number 5 and number 6 on page 48. If you're not confident and you're feeling like you could use a little bit more help, one more example, I will walk you through number 8 on page 48. So number 8, again, gives us 2 equations. It gives me y equals x squared minus 3x minus 3, and y equals negative 2x squared minus x plus 5. Just as we did in the last example, we will start with setting these two things equal to each other. So I have x squared minus 3x minus 3 equals negative 2x squared minus x plus 5. I need to bring everything over to one side of my equation. So I'm going to move everything over to the left. So to move the negative 2x squared, I have to add 2x squared. To move a negative x, I add. And to move a positive 5, I subtract. On the right, everything cancels, leaving me with 0. On the left, x squared plus 2x squared gives me 3x squared. Negative 3x plus x is negative 2x. Negative 3 minus 5 is negative 8. As we saw in the last one, I am now going to factor. So I'll begin with taking my first number and multiplying with my last number. 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. And from here, I want to find two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and add to negative 2. So I believe we should use negative 6 and 4. Again, there is a number out front. This one has a 3 out front. So I need to make sure to divide both of those numbers that I thought of by the 3. Negative 6 divided by 3 reduces to negative 2. And unfortunately, the 4/3 does not reduce. So from here, I can write my factors as x minus 2. And remember that number in the bottom of your fraction goes in front of your x. So it's a 3x and then plus 4, still equal to 0. From here, we will solve. So we will set each of our parentheses equal to 0. So I have x minus 2 equals 0 and 3x plus 4 equals 0. That gives me x equals 2. Here, I should subtract the 4 first, so I get negative 4. And from there, I will divide by 3. So I get x equals negative 4/3. Now, it is common to get fractions here. Please don't stress out. This is on the calculator portion for a reason, so you'll be able to use your calculator on all of these. Again, I need to make sure that I'm solving for my y values. So I'm going to take this 2 and plug it into one of my original equations. They both look pretty tricky to me, so I'm just going to use the first one. It gives me negative and then x squared, so I'll do 2 squared minus x, which is 2, plus 12. When I go to plug in this x here, I'm just going to use the same equation. So I have negative 4/3 squared minus 4/3 plus 12. From here, I recommend that you pause the video and give yourself a minute to type these two things into your calculator to make sure that you can get the correct answer. When I plugged them into my calculator for this first one, I got y equals 6. And over here, you can either write it as a fraction or a decimal. I decided to write it as a decimal, so it was 8.9. Again, you are not quite done yet. You want to make sure to write your final answer as an ordered pair. So my one ordered pair should be 2, 6. And my ordered pair for over here is negative 4/3, 8.9.